Part 32. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocnu. Chapter 311. Since the nightmare appeared in the sky, tens of thousands of players have been trapped in a virtual world called God's continent. The only way to return to the real world is to open a portal between virtuality and reality. Therefore, countless players began to look for the key to the apocalypse to clear the level. With the concerted efforts of many players, each level has been jointly cleared. However, players soon discovered that with the superposition of levels, the difficulty of clearing levels and the strength of monsters are also increasing. Now the progress of all players on the server is stuck at level 82, and the level limit has reached 81. The previous two levels were cleared in just 1 week thanks to the efforts of all players on the server. But this level 82 has blocked all players on the server for half a month. Now, under the leadership of a certain big guild, many large and small guilds across the server have gathered together to break through this difficult barrier. Many players across the server unanimously believe that the so-called key to the apocalypse is hidden in the last level of the 100th floor. As long as they clear the 100th floor, they have hope of returning to the real world. In the process of clearing levels, adventures and thrills coexist. Some mediocre players become famous after getting an opportunity. There are also players who accidentally died in the mouth of a ferocious boss. And some of these people may be powerful awakeners who are the most brave in the real world. Some may just be ordinary survivors with no special powers and surviving in the apocalypse. In this world constructed of fantasy, the identity in reality seems to be subverted. Generally speaking, under the premise that the key to the apocalypse has not yet been released, the entire player camp can be said to be united. At this moment, a large number of players gathered in a deep place filled with poison barriers and swamps. God's domain continent, level 81, mysterious cave. In the deep cave that is more than 10 feet high, densely packed player characters have gathered. These players are dressed in different clothes. Some are wearing heavy armor and holding swords, while others are covered in fur and look like orcs. And looking at it, these players are all high-level beings above level 70. Any one of them can be called a strong person outside. It can be said that this deep cave has gathered most of the high-end combat power in the entire server. The gathered players looked at each other and looked around. They were all powerful beings who were well known in the entire server. Look, that's the 7th big stone breaking the sky in the whole server. Everyone in it is ruthless. They were the ones who cleared the 77th floor for the first time. Wanhua Guild is actually here too. I heard that this is a guild composed of players from the human base with the same name. Wanhua base is a large human base. It's the Dawn Guild. This guild had already become famous before the disaster. After the disaster, it made rapid progress and overcame many difficulties. The players looked at the large and small guilds gathered around them and started talking about it. At the same time, many famous characters in the game were also exposed in the conversations between players. Xiao Yuntian, the president of the 3rd guild in the server City of Clouds, is leading this customs clearance event. It is rumored that he is also the descendant of a large family in Yungxiao base. This time he came to the game to hone his skills. Everyone looked at the handsome man standing in the center of the cave, surrounded by many players, with admiration in their eyes. That is Wind Spirit Sword Princess Fanyan. This is a beautiful swordsman famous throughout the server. After seeing it today, she is indeed as beautiful as the rumors. I heard someone calling out the title of Wind Spirit Sword Princess. The eyes of most of the men in the audience were focused on a beautiful figure in the Yungxiao City Guild. It is rumored that this beauty is not only a first-class beauty, but also inherited the racial profession of Wind Elf and is very powerful. Except for President Xiao Yuntian, anyone who pursues or admires him can travel across the continent. In the City of Clouds Guild, a girl next to the stunningly beautiful woman immediately shouted sharply, "What are you looking at? If you look again, I'll pluck out your eyes. The aggressive sights around her made people feel quite uncomfortable, and the girl said angrily, "Sister Fanyan, these people are really annoying." Fanyan, known as the Wind Spirit Sword Lady, also stared, but slowly shook her head towards her companion. It would be unwise to start a dispute with these players at this time. Others noticed the rebel team not far away. Everyone looked at the tall figure in front of the team with antlers on his head and a face like a lion and a tiger. The Kylan Beast King in the Dawn Guild, his race Kylan is the top bloodline of the orcs, and the 14th powerful existence on the God's Domain list. Next to Mao Yuming, Luo Ziyuan, Lone Wolf, and others also received attention. There are also unparalleled sword Luo Xiu, Yang Lang Lone Wolf. These are the top bosses among the players in the entire server. After the Divine Continent was isolated from the real world, a group of players showed off their magical powers in order to pass the level. Many previously unknown players have emerged in adventure and combat. Some good people will rank the strength of these prestigious guilds and players. This also formed the guild ranking, which ranks the reputation among guilds, and the God's Domain ranking, which ranks individual players' combat power. Suddenly, someone noticed a man standing next to Mao Yuming, wearing an open black robe. The man had black hair and a handsome face. He wore an open Taoist robe with dark red runes, revealing the white muscle texture on his chest. In the man's arms, he held a black cat with a faint glow of fire in its eyes, and a flame burning at the end of its tail. On the man's waist, there was an ordinary wooden sword. Yes, it's him. In the crowd, a player recognized the man standing in the Dawn Guild team. Who is this, and why is he standing next to the Kylan Beast King? A man was surprised and wondered. He had already realized that this man in the Taoist robe was not ordinary. Next to the man, another player seemed to recognize the identity of the black-robed man and hurriedly explained. It's normal that you don't know this person's identity, because he is always unique, but you must have heard of his guild. What guild? The man next to him swallowed his saliva and said solemnly. The guild with only one person. A guild with only one person. The player seemed to think of something and gradually showed a look of horror. Since the catastrophe, countless lone players have formed guilds of all sizes to make a living, but there is a guild with only one member. There were many guilds that saw that he was alone and tried to threaten this person for equipment and resources. But in the end, all these guilds disappeared without exception. Disappeared, disappeared. The players on the side widened their eyes and looked horrified. The man who was narrating the story also had a solemn expression, with sweat on his forehead. Yes, there was even a large guild on the list. All the players and guilds who tried to cause trouble were destroyed by a wooden sword. Wooden sword. Everyone stared at the wooden sword on the waist of the man in black robe. And this guild with only one player quickly became notorious and became a taboo among many players. The name of this guild is Guy. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 312. Is this the legendary Guyet? Many players looked at the black-robed man with horror in their eyes. They had heard about this guild with only one person. Unlike other guilds that huddled together for warmth, this player was unique. He walked in the dangerous world of God's domain like a lone wolf. It is said that this person is also ranked 23rd on the God's domain list. Because his record is rarely revealed to the public, some people even say that he has the strength of the top 10 on the list. In the Dawn Guild composed of the rebels, Mu Qiu, who had sharp 5 senses, naturally heard everyone's conversation. Aware of the shocked eyes around him, Mu Qiu gently stroked the black cat in his arms, narrowed his eyes, and looked around with a smile. However, with just this one glance, the surrounding players avoided their eyes and did not dare to look at him. Mu Qiu smiled faintly and retracted his gaze, turning to look at the tall orc beside him. He didn't expect that Mao Yuming, this kid, was actually quite prestigious in the game, and his strength was also among the best. In reality, Mao Yuming was just a half-baked kid whose superpowers were not stable. In the game, he was catching up, and he was a bit like a rising star in the resistance army. Mao Yuming touched his head and smiled brightly when he noticed Mu Chiu's gaze. It seemed that only at this time could he vaguely see some of the shadow of the boy in the past. Everyone, the boss of this floor is called Flame-Swallowing Ice Python, a powerful monster with dual attributes. It is worth noting that when its health drops below 15%, there is a chance that it will trigger a second life. All players who participate in the kill will receive a certain reward according to the damage value. But only players who give the boss a fatal blow will get rare equipment and props. When he said this, Mao Yuming's eyes were filled with determination. If there is a chance, we must grab the boss's chance to end it. Mu Chiu looked thoughtful and looked at Mao Yuming meaningfully. This kid seems to know this game world very well. Luo Ziyuan shouldered the heavy sword and stared into the depths of the cave. In the depths of the cave, there was a pool of blue-black water like a swamp. It was called a pool of water, but it was as deep and wide as a lake. There was no ripples on the surface of the water was turbid, and poisonous miasma spread. Luo Ziyuan's eyes were fixed, and he shouted, "Here they come! Everyone be careful!" With a loud shout, the calm swamp suddenly became turbulent and the waves were rolling. The dark blue water surface rippled with gray ripples, and then a group of huge waves rose up. I saw gray-black shadows rushing out of the deep pool with sticky poisonous water. Immediately afterwards, huge gray-black pythons appeared on the ground of the cave. Deep pool poisonous python, LV-72. Hiss. These giant pythons rushed out from the depths of the pool like lightning, spitting out their tongues, several feet long, with sinister fangs. The red pupils stared at the many players present. The next second, these giant pythons suddenly leaped up and pounced on the surrounding players. It's here. Everyone, follow the original plan, charge. With the noise of the players, all the players were eager to fight and launched the first round of fierce attacks on a group of giant pythons by the pool. Swords, spears, halberds, axes, hooks and forks, with a gorgeous halo, all shone out in this deep cave. Countless players were excited, and strange energy lights flashed out. The tall orcs roared and rushed into the pythons with their burly bodies. Warrior players wearing armor and holding swords followed closely with combat skills. Behind the front row, there were many mages muttering, and then a series of spell attacks with blessings also bombarded the battlefield. In the distance, gunners of different races operated bows, crossbows, artillery and other long-range weapons for support. Instantly, the roar of orcs, the slashing of swords, the chanting of mages, and the roar of arrows and artillery resounded throughout the deep cave. Countless fancy and gorgeous skills flashed frequently in the cave. And the red blood bars above the heads of the giant pythons on the battlefield also dropped rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, the pool deep in the cave seemed to be bottomless. Whenever a giant python fell down with a long hiss, waves would ripple in the pool. More giant pythons surged out from the bottom of the pool again. Of course, when a group of players bravely killed monsters and made their mark. Some players hid in the corners of the battlefield with their eyes flashing. They chose to hide their strength when their companions tried their best. In order to give the boss a fatal blow when he came, and get the final rare reward. As the battle progressed, under the fierce attacks of the players, more and more giant python monsters were eliminated, and after the health bar returned to 0, it exploded into a pool of blood mist. Just when the battle was in full swing. Suddenly, a huge change occurred in the dark pool deep in the cave. The originally dark blue pool suddenly turned fiery red, like a sign of a volcanic eruption. The hot air waves began to surge, and the fire waves even dispersed the poisonous miasma on the surface of the pool. The next second, The hot pool that seemed to be overflowing with magma was suddenly covered with a layer of frost. The ice covered the surface of the pool, extinguishing the boiling flames, and the water in the pool instantly became turbid under the fusion of ice and fire. The roar of some reptiles suddenly came from the bottom of the pool. Just at this time, the pool water began to boil again, but frost strangely formed on the water surface. With a loud bang, a huge monster rose into the sky from the depths of the pool with a layer of frost. This huge monster also has the body of a giant python, but its body length alone is close to the top of the cave that is more than 10 feet long. The tail stretched to the bottom of the pool, and the body was even more upright, with tight and plump dark brown skin. What's more terrifying is that this huge monster in the form of a giant python actually has two conjoined giant python heads. One snake head was deep red and hot like magma, and flames gushed out of it as it exhaled. The other head was dark blue, with a single horn on top, and even the air was covered with a thin layer of frost as it breathed. It appeared. The final boss of the 82nd floor, flame-swallowing ice python. Although many players were prepared in their hearts, they couldn't help but feel scared when they saw the figure of this behemoth. In front of this boss, they really seemed to be ants. Oh! Mewtwo, who was standing aside, looked up at the huge monster in front of him that penetrated the deep pool, as if he had sensed something. There was a faint purple light flickering on his open chest. "You seem to be very interested in it." Mewtwo smiled and said. "Well, I'll take you to eat meat today." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 313. With the sudden appearance of this huge boss, the deep pool under it seemed to be inspired by something. The water in the pool was hot and cold, and the boiling bubbles continued to dispel the poisonous miasma on the surface of the pool. Then, fierce pythons rushed out from the bottom of the pool again. In the blink of an eye, fierce pythons emerged again in the battlefield that was originally mostly cleared. The vicious and ferocious pythons surrounded the battlefield where the players were. What's even more weird is that the color of these pythons is no longer the brown and yellow of ordinary pythons. Instead, each one is deep red or dark blue, and the level is several levels higher than the previous pythons. Cold Pond Fire Python, LV75. Cold Pond Ice Python, LV76. These pythons have their own attributes. The giant pythons spewed flames and frost from their mouths, launching a new round of fierce attacks on the players who were already in decline. Damn it, why are there more and more of these long worms? Because the attack of the pythons on the periphery was too fierce, even very few players could reach the last boss level. At this moment, most of the players had already used their skills in the battle with the giant pythons just now. Now facing these ice, fire, and poisonous pythons with obviously stronger attacks, many players suddenly felt exhausted. One by one, giant pythons with colors of either fiery red or icy cold sprang out from the bottom of the pool. With the momentum of swallowing clouds and spitting out mist, they sprayed flames and breathed out frost at the surrounding player characters. Not only did these giant pythons attack with elemental damage, but their physical strength was also several levels higher than that of the previous snakes and pythons. And those players who were burned by flames and attacked by frost all showed pain on their faces. Some players with weak willpower even fell to the ground and wailed. In this virtual world, the damage received will be transmitted to the soul in reality. Another gray-black miasma drifted in the air. It was the miasma blown away by the flame frost on the pool. What was even more terrifying was that when the miasma came into contact with the many players around who had not yet noticed it, the skin surface of these players actually festered at a speed visible to the naked eye. The corroded wounds were accompanied by wisps of purple-black airflow, and the blood bars above the heads of these players quickly became thinner. Oh no, These miasma are highly toxic. With a loud shout, many players retreated in fear. But there were still some peripheral players who did not react and were attacked by the toxic miasma that was drifting away. In an instant, they covered their cheeks in pain, their skin festered, and they uttered a series of miserable wails. At this moment, waves of hot flames gushed out, instantly enveloping and burning these players. The fire poison was pervasive, and under the dual blessing of flames and highly toxicity, the blood bars above the heads of these players were instantly reduced to a critical red. When the red health bar of the warning completely dropped to 0, it meant that the health bar of the player's health value was emptied. Suddenly, a certain broken sound echoed in the battlefield. The pupils of many players who were still fighting monsters shrank slightly, and they looked at the sound. But they saw that the health bars of a large number of players who were hit by the fire poison were emptied, and a large amount of grey-black mist rose from their bodies. The next moment, just like the god of death harvesting lives, the bodies of these players exploded into a pool of blood mist crystals out of thin air. In this virtual world, the health bar returning to 0 represents the real death. Don't get entangled with these monsters first, besiege and kill the boss. In the distance, the president of the Cloud City Guild saw a large number of players die and shouted hurriedly. The strong men of other guilds also looked solemn when they saw this, and turned their offensive to the behemoth above the pool. If this continues, none of them will be able to pass the level. So, after seeing through the situation, these big guys who had hidden their strength no longer hid their weaknesses. All the skills he had in his back box were used to attack the two-headed giant python that was more than 10 feet long. Giant Rock Assault. A stone man whose whole body was made of rocks dropped his arms to the ground. Suddenly, peaks rose on the ground, the rocks were steep, and the continuous stone peaks rushed towards the direction of the flame-swallowing ice python. 10,000 flowers. Pieces of brightly colored petals appeared in front of the president of the 10,000 Flowers Guild. As he guided them, the surrounding petals instantly turned into sharp daggers that killed and fascinated the soul. Hundreds of swirling petals shot out in the direction of the two-headed giant python like blades. And at the back of the battlefield, countless bullets and artillery fire swept through the air, and the violent roar was deafening. Some powerful orcs and warriors also dispersed the poisonous snakes and giant pythons around them, and turned to attack the two-headed giant python that was the boss. In the Dawn Guild, which was formed by the resistance army, Mao Yuming led the way in the front row. He roared, and his already tall body expanded several times. At this moment, he seemed to have turned into the out-of-control stitched monster again. The Kylan warrior transformed by Mao Yuming held a huge machete and ran towards the huge two-headed python. Behind Mao Yuming, Luo Ziyuan, Gulang, and others in the resistance army also shouted and rushed towards the direction of the pool. Rain turns into thousands of raindrops. Xiao Yuntian, the chief of the Cloud City, held a silver-scaled spear, and the dancing spear tip was accompanied by a fierce rain. Instantly, many big guys showed their magical powers and used all their skills to attack the two-headed python. At this moment, many players realized that these real big guys were far from serious. The fierce skill light waves blasted out like dense rain. The huge two-headed python with a body that covered the sky let out a long hiss, and released frost and burning flames between its two heads of ice and fire. As soon as those long-range artillery fire and crossbows touched the giant python, they were burned into ashes by the flames in an instant. The freezing cold and fierce flames spewed out at the same time, and the destructive offensive instantly formed a confrontation with a group of players who rushed in. Clear these monsters, don't let them get close to the pool. The players who reacted launched concentrated fire on the surrounding pythons. Don't let these shrimp soldiers and crab generals disturb the siege of the boss by these big guys. The attack of the two-headed python is naturally extremely fierce, with blazing flames and biting cold winds. However, it had to face many powerful players who were also among the best in the whole server. Wearing a waisted long skirt, Fanyan found the right opportunity, the breeze floated under her feet, her light figure leaped, and the long sword in her hand flashed a residual image. I saw a beautiful figure flashing by, and a scarlet blood mark instantly appeared on the waist and abdomen of the giant python. The key part was injured, and the blood bar on the head of the flame-swallowing ice python dropped instantly. "Sister Fanyan, good job," the girl next to her exclaimed, with admiration in her eyes. At this time, as the huge body of the giant python was frustrated and bent, many players took this opportunity to bombard the injured waist of the two-headed giant python with their most powerful skills. And the deep red blood bar of the two-headed giant python also dropped rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. When the blood bar of the two-headed giant python dropped to less than 1/5, many players immediately showed joy on their faces. However, the next second, as the giant python's pupils flashed with violent colors, a surge of energy also gushed out from the depths of the pool. The joy on the faces of many players froze instantly. Mao Yuming on the battlefield thought of something and shouted, "Oh no, it's going berserk." Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 314. With Mao Yuming's shout, the ground of the entire cave began to shake violently. Then, the bodies of the ice and fire pythons that filled the whole place exploded, turning into gray-black poisonous miasma and disappearing in the air. A sharp hissing sound came from the depths of the cave, and a two-headed giant python with a body that covered the sky opened its sharp fangs, and its huge tail began to swing violently. As the two-headed giant python swayed, the deep pool water under it also began to boil. The water level in the pool began to drop continuously, and the rising water vapor turned into poisonous miasma along with the exploded python and spread around. In an instant, the scattered poisonous miasma seemed to have life, spreading in all directions with the two-headed giant python as the center. "Not good, stay away from these poisonous gases." Some players reacted and hurriedly reminded their companions around. The front-line players who had just launched an attack on the two-headed python retreated one after another, their faces horrified. And those players who had not yet left the poison circle were instantly corroded into a pool of dust by the poison miasma, leaving no trace of their bodies. As the poison miasma spread rapidly like ripples and waves. In the center of the poison circle, the wounds on the two-headed python healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the blood bar on the top of its head continued to rise. "Damn it, why is it so unlucky?" a guild player roared, and while staying away from the poison circle, his eyes were fixed on the huge two-headed python. It seemed that the monster was about to be killed, but the python's violent skill was triggered at this point. Looking at the two-headed python whose status was instantly restored, many players flashed a look of disappointment in their eyes. WWW. Failed at the last hurdle. Fanyan's footsteps were light, and she dodged the attack of the poisonous miasma while moving. However, she stared at the increasingly powerful two-headed giant python with a slightly fixed gaze. Obviously, this boss is more powerful than before in a violent state. After this battle, it will be more difficult to find another chance to kill it. Fanyan frowned slightly. She had more important things to do in the real world, and she couldn't afford to waste time here. Just as Fanyan was hesitating secretly, a gust of wind suddenly whistled past her ears. Fanyan's pupils shrank suddenly, and then a black shadow passed by her. Fanyan's eyes flashed with surprise. Unlike other people who were afraid to avoid the poisonous miasma, this person actually rushed directly into the poisonous miasma. Fanyan, holding a long sword, suddenly looked back and was surprised to find that the black shadow was a man in a black Taoist robe. What even Fanyan didn't notice was that the moment she brushed past this figure, the jade pendant on her chest suddenly flashed a deep luster. "Hey, that guy is looking for death. Is he crazy?" At the same time, many players have retreated outside the poisonous miasma, looking at the black-robed figure rushing into the miasma in shock. The poisonous miasma formed a dark barrier with the two-headed giant python as the center. All players who came into contact with the poisonous miasma were corroded into a pool of blood mist. The negative poisonous gas effect inside was so fearful that even these well-equipped top players dared not touch it. But this black-robed figure actually rushed in directly. Many players gathered in front of the barrier formed by the poisonous miasma, staring at the black-robed figure with shocked faces. Someone seemed to recognize the figure and exclaimed, This is the Lone Ranger who founded the guild with only one person, Guyet." Then, there was a sound of people sucking in a breath of cold air around. It turned out to be that ruthless person. No wonder. You see, he actually rushed towards the boss." A sudden exclamation attracted everyone's attention. Everyone turned their heads and found that the black-robed figure actually rushed straight towards the two-headed giant python. Almost all the eyes were focused on this black-robed figure. What is he going to do? Roar. In the poisonous miasma, Mewtwo, wearing a black-colored open-collared Taoist robe, moved his feet. The black cat in his arms looked at the giant python covering the sky in the distance with fierce eyes. "Shh, let me play with it." Feeling the strong fighting spirit of the cat in his arms, Mewtwo smiled and comforted it. Meow. The black cat rubbed Mewtwo's chest intimately, and then turned into a ball of black gas and attached to Mewtwo's robe. Then, next. Mewtwo's eyes were full of fighting spirit, and he stopped at the feet of the two-headed giant python. Without the energy of the main body, this split soul only had 1% of the combat power of the main body. The violent giant python in front of him was barely able to fight him. Mewtwo slowly pulled out the dead bamboo wooden sword from his waist, and black air currents suddenly swirled on it. Hiss. The two-headed giant python let out a long hiss, twisting its huge body to attack Mewtwo. Just as the giant python twisted its huge tail and was about to hit Mewtwo, the black robe fluttered. There was a loud bang, and a huge gully was blasted out of the ground where Mewtwo was originally. Dead. The many players watching at the edge of the poisonous miasma swallowed their saliva unconsciously. "No, look over there." Suddenly a person pointed to the sky and saw a black figure flashing past the poisonous miasma that extended to the top of the cave. The black robe was stirring, and the wooden sword held in Mewtwo's hand was filled with black energy. The next moment, it suddenly appeared on top of the two-headed giant python. As Mewtwo wielded the black knife and slashed down, all the players could clearly hear the sound of the blade cutting through the air despite being far apart. The sword light with black energy flashed frequently in the air. After slashing the huge head of the flame-swallowing ice python, deep blood marks suddenly appeared. The giant python hissed in pain, and its pupils turned red and spit out flames. The other head also released the cold icicles with murderous intent, trying to kill Mewtwo instantly. However, Mewtwo's figure was extremely flexible, moving and flickering in the miasma-filled air. The wooden sword filled with black energy seemed to become an ink-colored ribbon, and the black blade kept slashing at the huge body of the two-headed python. Just like that, the two-headed giant python launched a fierce and devastating offensive on the spot. But the figure in black robe, which was much smaller than him, flashed in the air one after another as if he was relaxed. The black knife in his hand twitched like a long whip, and dark black blades spread all over the battlefield. For a moment, the giant python's screams and fierce bombardment echoed throughout the cave. Such a fierce battle instantly stunned all the players watching. What was originally a siege by thousands of players has now turned into a one-person show. He's not going to fight the boss alone, is he? Some players looked at the black-robed figure with dull eyes and trembling voices. Even the presidents of many powerful guilds were filled with shock when they saw the scene of Mewtwo fighting fiercely with the giant python. "Sister Fanyan, this person is so strong." Beside Fanyan, who was wearing a long skirt, a girl exclaimed. Fanyan stared at the only figure fighting the giant python, his pupils narrowed. and behind a crowd of onlookers. A chubby man stared closely at Miuchiu's face with surprise. This is, no. It can't be. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 315. The dark blade flashed in the cave, and the deep blade was very conspicuous in the dark cave. Outside the barrier of gray-black poisonous miasma, the surviving players had sweat on their faces. They looked at the figure fighting with the two-headed python in the depths of the cave with horror. Some people were exhausted in the previous boss battle, and their foreheads were soaked with sweat. Some people were shocked by the black-robed figure who challenged the boss alone in the poisonous miasma and broke out in a cold sweat. How could it be so strong? Is this really a player? In the depths of the dark cave, the two-headed python on the pool was shaking and shaking. Above its huge body, a black-robed figure that was much smaller than it held a wooden sword surrounded by deep black air. As the black-robed figure flashed around the giant python, the ink-like blade light also flashed in the air. Black knives like dense rain danced wildly on the body of the giant python. The latter's huge body could not help but retreat backwards. Bloody narrow lines continued to appear on the flesh. In just a few breaths, the blood bar on the head of the giant python, which had just risen, dropped rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Is that, Brother Chiu? Among the many players watching, the resistance army also looked at Miuchiu, who was fighting fiercely with the boss, with shocked faces. This was no longer a fierce battle, but more like a one-sided crushing. The companion beside him couldn't help swallowing his saliva and said in a daze, "Is the priest profession so strong?" Suddenly, a roar of the giant python came from the battlefield in the distance. Then, there was a great earthquake, shaking the earth and mountains. Not good. Mao Yuming thought of something and said in surprise. In the depths of the poisonous miasma, the two-headed giant python with its body reaching the bottom of the pool suddenly stood up, and the deep pool water below it splashed. In an instant, the deep red and ice blue heads of the giant python suddenly entangled together. The next second, the poisonous miasma that was overflowing all around merged into the giant python. Accompanied by a dazzling light, the two heads of different colors merged together in an instant. A black mist swept through, and a giant python with a blue-black body and two horns on its head rushed out of the poisonous miasma. And the moment this huge blue-black python appeared, it rushed towards Miuchiu with red eyes. The blue-black giant python opened its bloody mouth, and its fangs were cold. A group of black poisonous mist with a hot breath gushed out in an instant. Looking at the deadly poisonous fog getting closer and closer, Miuchiu's fighting spirit rose, and he chuckled. The little bugs have a lot of tricks. Miuchiu leaped up, and the boiling hot poisonous fog passed by him. The hurricane roared, rolling up his robe. Miuchiu's figure was suspended in the air, and a group of dark purple light flashed in front of his chest. However, as this dark light flashed, a series of bright red blood appeared on Miuchiu's arm. These blood seemed to have life, flowing along Miuchiu's right arm and into the wooden sword in his hand. And the wooden sword gradually turned blood red under the influx of these bright red blood. From a distance, it seemed as if it was infused with blood. Under the shield of the gray-black poisonous miasma, the many players watching naturally could not see such fine details. They could only vaguely see Miuchiu's flexible figure avoiding the poisonous fog of the giant python. Immediately, the wooden sword in his hand was instantly dyed with the color of flames. Only a group of elite rebels saw the clue at this time. Mao Yuming stared at the blood-red longsword in Miuchiu's hand. He also saw the purple light that flashed across Miuchiu's chest just now. "Uncle, that can't be." Luo Ziyuan, who was standing aside, looked solemn and whispered. "Although I don't know how Brother Chiu brought it to this world, it should be correct, this power comes from the box of the ghost." Only they knew that the red color attached to the blade did not come from the reflection of the flame, but from the watering of blood. In the poisonous miasma, a black-robed figure stood in the air, holding a long sword surrounded by deep red blood. The gushing poisonous mist was dispersed by a touch of blood in an instant. The black gas and the blood light passed through the huge body of the giant python one after another, and Mewtwo's figure was constantly changing. Under the frenzy of the sword, even the poisonous miasma python after its rage could only make painful wails. And the many players beside the poisonous miasma could only look up at this domineering black figure. The entire cave battlefield has completely become a battlefield for one person. Many players looked at each other. They knew that after today, the name of Guya will be completely resounding throughout the continent. Behind the group of players watching, a plump man stared at the figure in the poisonous miasma and murmured, "Such an awesome posture, can't be wrong. Why did this gentleman come here, my goodness?" When everyone was watching, Mewtwo was seen holding a blood blade, and his figure was so fast that it turned into a residual image in the air. The black figure turned into a stream of black and red light under the blood light, and in an instant it penetrated the huge body of the giant python. The next moment, Mewtwo's figure turned into a stream of light and emerged on the ground, and the blood light on the blade was still flashing. However, the waist and abdomen of the giant python suddenly showed two cross-red scratches. From a distance, the blood groove on the top of the giant python's head also returned to zero in an instant. There was only a crisp sound in my ears, and the huge body of the giant python was shattered into a blood-colored prism, floating in the air. Congratulations to the player Chiumu for successfully passing the 82nd level, and the upper limit of the level of all players in the server has been raised. The poisonous miasma covering the battlefield gradually receded, revealing the unbelievable and horrified faces of many players. Are you kidding? He actually, alone, killed the boss. This kid is cheating. The players looked at the only figure standing deep in the cave with the eyes they looked at a monster. However, what they didn't notice was that at the moment the giant python fell, its broken body turned into tiny prisms and drifted away. The scattered prisms finally turned into blood mist that was difficult to capture with the naked eye. They gathered in the dark purple box on Mewtwo's chest. Congratulations, you killed the 82nd floor boss, the flame-swallowing ice python, in the first round. The system prompt message came to his ears, and a pile of golden items appeared in front of Mew Kaiyufeng. These are the props and equipment dropped after the boss was defeated. Job transfer item book: Ice Flame Snake Python, Ice Fire Magic Spear, Poison Miasma Field, Scorching Fire Whirl. One weapon after another or skill scroll appeared in front of Mewtwo. Mewtwo just glanced at them and put them in his pocket. Many players around him also gathered around at this time. They stared at Mewtwo with admiration, suspicion, or greed. But many players in the front had more greed in their eyes. All the treasures that the boss exploded were gathered on Mewtwo alone. And Mewtwo was just one person, and he must have consumed a lot after just going through a big battle. Many guild players had a gleam in their eyes, and were already planning how to take the treasures from Mewtwo. Of course, some really powerful guild players have seen that Mewtwo has a strong background, and dare not easily touch his edge. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 316. Brother Chu. Just when many players were looking at him eagerly, the Dawn Guild, which was composed of a group of resistance forces led by Luo Ziyuan and Mao Yuming, suddenly approached. Hundreds of people gathered around Mewtwo, which also made the ambitious players who were eyeing him covetously give up their thoughts. Brother Chu, the Berserker priest is really strong. Mao Yuming looked at Mewtwo with stars in his eyes, with admiration in his eyes. Brother Chu, if I'm not mistaken, the faint light just now should come from that holy object, right? Luo Ziyuan was relatively rational and asked. Mu Qiu smiled and nodded. It's really that. Luo Ziyuan looked at Mu Qiu in shock. How can real objects appear in this virtual game world? Mu Qiu touched his nose and explained ambiguously. I don't know the specific reason, as long as I have a thought in my mind, it will appear. Maybe it has something to do with its ability to devour souls. Luo Ziyuan nodded solemnly. Through the ability of the ghost box, he suddenly thought of what the rebels have been looking for, the apocalypse key. Will the apocalypse key also appear in this form in this world? Your Excellency is worthy of being the Guya who dares to form a guild alone. Your strength really makes us ashamed. Suddenly, a figure slowly walked out of the crowd, smiling and clapping. The rebels looked over and saw that the person who came was Xiao Yuntian, the initiator of this action, the president of Cloud City. This Xiao Yuntian is also a strong man on the God Realm list, and his long spear is said to be invincible. Xiao Yuntian walked towards Mu Qiu with a smile on his face, and his tone was impeccable. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect to meet such a powerful person like you, Qiu Mu, this time. I, Lao Shi, have made you my friend. Everyone looked over and saw a rough man walking over with a big smile, as if he was very familiar with Mu Qiu. It's Shi Pokong, the president of the Giant Stone Breaking the Sky Guild. It is rumored that he is also the inheritor of a large base. Many players were amazed. Being surrounded by so many guild bosses, the players with ulterior motives completely gave up their thoughts. Don't hit a smiling person. Mu Qiu smiled and exchanged a few words with several guild bosses who came forward. He even added several guild presidents as friends. Suddenly, the black robe on Mu Qiu's body fluttered, and a ball of hot black air floated out along the dark red lines of the Taoist robe. Meow. The black air gradually condensed into the shape of a black cat in Mu Qiu's arms. The black cat raised its head and licked the corner of Mu Qiu's clothes, and then yawned as if it was sleepy. Seeing this, Mu Qiu said nothing more, and just said goodbye to everyone with a normal expression. Seeing Mu Qiu leave so easily after a big battle, Xiao Yuntian, the organizer of this joint action, clapped his hands. In any case, our action is completed this time. Thank you for your help. As the president of a large guild, Xiao Yunfei's words and deeds are impeccable. After a speech that can be called a speech, the players entrenched in the cave also left one after another. After many players left, only the members belonging to Cloud City were left in the cave battlefield. Sister Fanyan, that man just now was so strong. He was a little handsome, the type I like. A girl with twin ponytails said so, with stars in her eyes. Fanyan looked at the severe damage caused by the war in the depths of the cave, and her cherry lips opened slightly. If this person has superpowers in the real world, he must be the inheritor of a human base. By observing Mu Qiu's previous battle, Fanyan had already guessed it in her heart. She frowned and murmured. Qiu Mu. Not far away, Xiao Yuntian, wearing light armor, stared at the deep cave that had not yet been repaired, with a gleam in his eyes. Brother, that Guya collected so many treasures that exploded, why don't we do it? We also have a share in the siege of the boss. There are so many people in the cave forcing the palace together. I don't believe he won't hand it over. On a wilderness, hundreds of players from the Jiangxi Pokong Guild were walking towards a town. One of the subordinates was a little puzzled and asked the strong man beside him. Unexpectedly, the eyes of the sturdy man who had just looked carefree suddenly became fierce. You know nothing. That kid is definitely not simple. Shi Pokong suddenly looked up at the sky and scolded. This place is different from the end of the world outside. There are too many geniuses and ruthless people hidden. Be honest when you have nothing to do. Don't easily provoke tough guys. Otherwise, I can't explain to the old man if you die in this world. At the same time, a dense jungle on the 81st floor. Mu Qiu hugged a black cat and walked leisurely in the jungle. There were trees on both sides, the breeze was warm, and the sun shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves. Mewtwo gently stroked the black cat's soft fur, squinted his eyes, and had an inexplicable smile on his face. Suddenly, Mewtwo paused and stopped. Turning around and looking at the deep and dense jungle behind him, he smiled faintly. "I've been following you for so long, it's almost time to come out, right?" There was a rustling sound in the jungle, and a team wearing armor was seen walking out of the depths of the jungle. One of the leading men held a big sword and shouted, "After a round of boss battles, you should be exhausted, right? If you have some sense, hand over the equipment that the boss exploded." The corners of Mewtwo's mouth raised. Zichhen was amazed. It seems that those big guilds are still somewhat self-aware. He patted the black cat in his arms on the back, and the latter turned to look at the armored team, his eyes suddenly becoming fierce. "It's up to you to come out and do some activities this time." Mewtwo narrowed her eyes and smiled like a spring breeze. Roar. With a loud beast roar, the seemingly harmless black cat in Mewtwo's arms turned into a bunch of black flames. The black flames hovered in the air, growing stronger. When it landed, it turned into a huge and ferocious tiger, its whole body covered in black flames. "Weird, monster." The eyes of the armored warriors flashed with fear. However, before they could escape, the giant black tiger wrapped in flames had already pounced upon them. All the birds and animals are scattered in the jungle, and the fallen leaves are flying. A moment later, Mewtwo was still holding a cute-looking black cat in her arms. The warriors in front of him disappeared. Under his feet, armor and equipment were scattered all over the ground. He looked behind him and said slowly, "Stop hiding and come out together." There was another rush of footsteps in the jungle. Immediately afterwards, a round body rushed towards Mewtwo. Just as Mewtwo was about to step down, she heard a familiar voice coming from the plump figure. "My lord, you have allowed me to see you." Mewtwo was stunned, but this bloated man made a vertical leap. He directly hugged Mewtwo's thigh and cried, "Brother Mew, Uncle Mew, Fatty has finally found his family." The corner of Mewtwo's mouth twitched slightly. The person in front of him turned out to be his old acquaintance at Yuhei Base and his former teammate in the team, Fatty. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 317. News of the clearance of the 82nd floor quickly spread throughout the entire God's Domain continent. So far, in just 1 month, 3 levels have been broken through by many players. There is no doubt that this is great news for the many players whose consciousness is trapped in the God's Domain continent. And the Lone Knight Guild, which was composed of 1 person and was able to defeat the boss alone, has also completely entered the attention of all players. And Chiu Mew, codenamed Lone Knight, also squeezed into the top 10 on the God's Domain list in just 1 day. In the Divine Continent, somewhere in an unknown dark valley. There are steep cliffs and jagged rocks in the valley, and the roar of some kind of monster can be heard from the depths. Even some adventurers who specialize in exploring secret realms definitely dare not challenge this dangerous restricted area. However, deep in the unknown valley, a gloomy laughter could be heard at this moment. "GGG, boss, these guys cleared the level faster than we expected." In the deep shadow of the valley, a thin figure sounded crazy. "Shall we go add some ingredients to them?" In front of the cliff, a tall bald man spoke with a strong voice. "Itake, don't cause unnecessary problems. The purpose of our coming here is to clear out the rebels." On the side, a lazy voice said angrily, "Really, if we can just let them kill each other, why do we all have to go into battle?" The bald man was as strong as a bear and shouted in a rich voice, "You're such a tough guy, even with that adult's ability, you can't trap such a huge number of human souls for a long time. What we have to do is to find those rebels as soon as possible and annihilate them all." Suddenly a clear female voice whispered, Really, it's just a matter of wiping out a resistance army. How about such a big fight? What do you know behind this? Bear. The bald man was about to say something more, but was suddenly interrupted by a cold voice. I saw the outline of a long-haired man slowly walking out of the darkness. Boss. Seeing this figure speaking, many voices present suddenly became mute. The long-haired man walked out of the darkness and raised his head with deep eyes, as if he wanted to see the faint beam of light through the gap between the mountain walls. The world is somehow beyond our control. The long-haired man suddenly spoke. Pay close attention to the movements of all parties and use any means necessary. We must not let this opportunity pass by. After the long-haired man left, many shadows dared to speak again. Boss, what you mean is that as long as we can find out the whereabouts of the rebels, we can use any method. The thin figure smiled mischievously, with a harsh tone in his tone. In other words, it doesn't matter even if a few geniuses from human bases die, right? The bald man heard the implication, with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Putting all the deaths on the rebels is. If we can take the opportunity to eliminate some seeded players from other bases as soon as possible, this is what Zilan base would like to see. You mean? In the shadow of the deep valley, a conspiracy against all players is quietly unfolding. God's domain continent, floor 80, small building by the lake. There is a lake standing in the countryside on the 80th floor. The water is clear and calm. An exquisite and unique wooden house has been built by the lake. Birds are singing and greenery is clustered, just like a green wonderland. In the elegant and unique wooden house, the fat man sat on the futon, sitting upright and dripping with cold sweat. In front of him, there was a square table made of fine wood. The fat man nervously tilted his head slowly and moved his gaze to the open kitchen at the end of his sight. A slender figure was fiddling with grinding instruments. After a while, the aroma of coffee filled the air. The fat man looked stern, and beads of sweat the size of peas appeared on his forehead. He couldn't help but be frightened. The person making coffee in front of him as if nothing had happened was actually the leader of a force that dominated a party in this apocalyptic world. The Lord of Evernight who once single-handedly suppressed many destructive level powerhouses. There was a gentle sound of footsteps in my ears. Mu-Chiu, who was wearing a black thin coat, was seen walking slowly with 2 cups of coffee. Pushing a cup of coffee to the square table in front of the fat man, Mu-Chiu took the opportunity to sit opposite the fat man. Your Majesty, brother, no, sir, what do you think you are doing? The fat man had a smile on his face and was so shocked that he couldn't speak clearly. This is the boss who can control the life and death of hundreds of thousands of people with a single thought, his immediate boss. If before, Fatty could still call Mu-Chiu a brother-in-law and talk freely, but now he doesn't dare to be arrogant at all. The emperor was so angry that he laid down 1,000,000 corpses, and the fat man was really afraid that he would chop him down if he was unhappy. Mu-Chiu, who was sitting opposite Fatty, was not surprised to see the former's panic. Instead, he sipped his coffee and looked at the fat man in front of him. Speaking of which, Fatty's appearance hasn't changed much in the game. Otherwise, Mu-Chiu wouldn't be able to recognize him at a glance. The biggest difference is that the fat man has 2 more mustaches under his nose. Coupled with his round body and sly face, he has a more vulgar temperament. Tell me, why are you here? Mu-Chiu was also quite surprised to see the fat man at first. The fat man who should have stayed in Yuhei actually ran to this virtual world. It is said that meeting an old friend in a new place is a good thing, but Mu-Chiu felt a little subtle after meeting the fat man. Why does he seem to be everywhere? When Mu-Chiu asked the reason, the fat man seemed to be excited and cried pear blossoms in the rain. After listening to the fat man's exaggerated explanation, Mu-Chiu also learned the whole story. After the Redemption War, the entire Yuhei senior management ushered in a major change. Zhang Qinggui and Wang Daipen's subordinates were all eliminated from the management level of Yuhei, and new people took over. It is worth mentioning that because of Fatty's smooth personality and his friendship with Mu Qiu, he soon became a member of the management class of the Eternal Night Dynasty. However, Fatty's strength is mediocre, and he can only manage the docking of affairs and the transportation of goods on weekdays. Since the breakup between Yuhei and Zilan Base, the trading channels of high-tech items in Zilan Base have also been closed. But the technological inventions of Zilan Base are not only of epoch-making significance. Its combat reconnaissance and other functions are also coveted by countless bases. Not long ago, Fatty led his team to intercept on the road that the trading troops of Zilan Base must pass. It is natural to pick up a batch of the latest scientific research products for trading. Among them, there is a mental linkage device that connects the virtual and real channels and looks like a helmet. Fatty was an internet addict before the end of the world. How could he resist such temptation? So he went directly into the game and played it in the name of deep into the enemy camp. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 318. His grandmas, who would have thought that I wouldn't be able to get out as soon as I came in. The fat man fell down in front of the table and cried so hard that his heart was broken and his heart was broken. Mu Qiu sat opposite the fat man, dumbfounded, and continued. You mean you are the only one in the entire Yuhei who came in? After receiving a positive reply, the corners of Mu Qiu's mouth twitched slightly. What a big wrongdoer. The fat man cried for a while, and suddenly thought of something. He suddenly raised his head from the table where he was buried deeply, and looked at Mu Qiu with burning eyes. Boss, brother Mu, Uncle Mu, you must have a way to get out of here with your great powers, right? The fat man's eyes were full of hope and his face was excited. A faint smile appeared on the corner of Mu Qiu's mouth, and she smiled without saying a word. Seeing Mu Qiu's appearance, Fatty immediately knew there was something going on and clasped his hands together. Please, please take Fatty with you. Mu Qiu raised her index finger in front of her lips and smiled. The time has not yet come. I understand, I understand. The fat man was so tactful and understood Mu Qiu's intention instantly. He looked excited and nodded repeatedly. This is what Mu Qiu admires most about Fatty, who knows how to measure and advance and retreat. Except this time when I entered the game world and became a big enemy. During the conversation, Mu Qiu also accidentally learned about Fatty's feat. You mean, the rankings on the God's Domain ranking and the guild ranking were done by you and others? Mu Qiu's eyes were slightly surprised this time. He didn't expect that Lashai's player list was actually made by Fatty. When he mentioned the rankings on the famous list in God's Domain, the fat man's eyes shone with an inexplicable light, and his back straightened up a lot. You don't know something, but we are now known as Bai Xiaosheng of God's Domain. The fat man's face was radiant, and he suddenly remembered the identity of the real owner in front of him, and said with a naive smile, Tianlai Novel Network. Actually, it's just to make a living here, you know. Mu Qiu shook her head and tasted the coffee in the cup. Who are the people on this list of gods? When the fat man mentioned his areas of expertise, he became interested. You also know that now the divine continent has gathered awakened people from all over the world. Immediately afterwards, Fatty revealed all the named players on the God's Domain list. Some players can even detail their names and abilities in the real world. Of course, Mu Qiu has no interest in these shrimp soldiers and crab generals. Most of the players on the God's Domain list are internet-addicted players who became gods before the game was closed. In fact, their true strength cannot be scrutinized. But there are a few players. Boss, you can take care of them. The fat man said with a serious face, and then like a thief, he took out a bag-like list from his pocket. Among them, Shi Pokong, the president of Big Rock Guild, Xiao Yuntian, the president of Yungxiao City, and Wind Spirit Sword Princess who I have seen before are all included in this list. These are all characters who have emerged recently and quickly climbed onto the God's Domain rankings. Preliminary judgment should be that he is the leader of other human bases. Mewtwo nodded, and it was obvious that the fat man had done some homework. The fat man stared at the names on the list and hesitated. Brother Mew, please pay attention to two other characters. Oh. The fat man pointed to the second-ranked name on the list, with only one word Thunder marked on it. This person is said to look like a young man, but as soon as Fang appeared, he defeated the second player in the God's Domain rankings at that time with just one move. The fat man had a solemn look in his eyes. According to the situation at that time, this boy's superpowers in reality, it should be related to thunder and lightning. Mewtwo narrowed her eyes slightly. Oh? Is it the power of thunder and lightning? Hearing this, Mewtwo gradually became interested. And ranked first on the list, this is the player who was recognized as the number one player in the entire server long before the game world was closed, Dragon King. At the same time, this player named Dragon King is also the president of the first guild in the server, Dragon Rider. It is rumored that this Dragon King is extremely powerful and has not lost a single game since the launch of the game. There have been many famous players who tried to challenge him for the number one throne, but in the end, without exception, these people all disappeared without a trace. Mewtwo looked at the fat man and smiled. You said it in such detail, I think you already have a guess in your mind, right? The fat man gave a thumbs up with a solemn look on his face. I suspect that this Dragon King and the Dragon Rider Guild under his command are probably the forces planted by the Zilan base in the game world. Mewtwo nodded, not surprised. As the initiator of tens of thousands of players being trapped, there is nothing more exciting than watching a group of players despair in the work. After a brief understanding, Fatty is indeed worthy of the name by Xiao Sheng. According to him, Fatty colluded with a group of middle and low-level players who were good at fabricating information and set up a guild to sell intelligence materials. Mewtwo added Fatty as a friend, and then discovered that Fatty's ID was actually called Your Fat Master. You Fat Man, LV80. Race, Orcs. Occupation, Supersonic Tortoise. Mewtwo. He finally understood why the fat man could survive by selling intelligence. Mewtwo told the fat man to tell him as soon as he found the key of the apocalypse. Before leaving, the fat man seemed to be reluctant to leave, looking at Mewtwo reluctantly. In the end, Mewtwo kicked him out of the door, and the world finally became quiet. After the fat man left, Mewtwo stood in the wooden house and slowly opened the light screen of the inventory. I saw beams of light flashing, and a pile of golden equipment props were stacked on the floor. These are the weapons and props that exploded after killing the boss. Skill books, job transfer scrolls, rare props, precious weapons. Any of them can attract a rush of looting when taken to the outside world. But now they are thrown on the ground casually like garbage. Mewtwo's chest was shining brightly, and a palm-sized dark purple box appeared vaguely. Then a strange scarlet longsword suddenly appeared in Mewtwo's hand. Blood threads were entangled on the blade, and the sound of ghosts crying could still be vaguely heard. Then, blood-red ghosts flew and wandered from the blade. Like a shark smelling blood, it pounced on the weapons and equipment on the ground with its fangs and claws. The weapons and equipment on the ground that were enough to drive the outside players crazy were eroded by the greedy blood souls in the blink of an eye. The blood-red light on the demon sword became more and more intense. The demon sword seemed to be very eager for the soul energy in this virtual world. Mewtwo could even feel that the demon sword in his hand was about to be promoted again and raised to a new height. In a few breaths, the light on the ground dissipated, and the long swords and broad axes all turned into a pile of powder and disappeared. Only a row of skill scrolls were spread in the original place, emitting a faint light. Looking at the pool of skill books on the ground, Mewtwo was in trouble. Mewtwo had also read these skill books, most of which were illusions that deceived the soul, and they were useless in the real world. Mewtwo simply disdained it, and even the demon sword had no desire to devour it. Mewtwo pondered for a moment, looked at the skill scrolls on the ground, and his eyes flashed. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 319. God's Domain, Floor 80, Lagrain Town. In the middle of the land surrounded by forests, stands a small town made of rocks. As a dangerous level with many dangerous places, countless players have fallen into this mysterious jungle. As the only safe area on the 80th floor, this small town surrounded by mountains has become the best choice for many players to recuperate. The town has been set up as a restricted area for monsters, and all skills are insulated from the use of the town. Any player's skills and weapons will be ineffective in the town, thus avoiding all overt fighting and killing. As a result, the town has become an excellent place for players to escape the hustle and bustle of the outside world. Some players know that there is no hope of escaping this virtual world. He even chose to live in peace in a small town and spend the rest of his short life in peace and tranquility. The sun is shining brightly, spring is full of joy, and the European-style retro streets are crowded with people, a mixture of fish and dragons. Warriors in armor passed by orcs covered in fur, and the sounds of players shouting and arguing could be heard from both sides. Players not only recuperate in this town. Some players will also take the loot in the level to trade in the market in the town. The types of these traded items are also all kinds of strange. There are furs and teeth of wild beasts, sophisticated equipment like armor and swords, and rare potion crystals are even more numerous and endless. There were endless shouts on the street, and among the crowds of people, several tall figures came from the end of the street to the market. I saw several sturdy orcs with ferocious faces walking from a distance. The dense crowd around him was rudely knocked aside. The player who was knocked down looked unhappy at first. Just as he was about to scream, he suddenly fell silent after seeing the orcs' bodies that were several times more powerful. Some players recognized the faces of these orcs and couldn't help but look frightened. He's from the Wild Beast Guild. As the game world has been closed for several months, many players and guilds have emerged and become famous through clearing battles one after another. Wild Beast Guild is at the top of the guild list. All members of the guild are powerful warriors of the orc tribe, with fierce attacks and cruel temperaments. Although players are prohibited from using force in this town. But if players leave this town, they will not be restricted. There are many cases where players offend big bosses in small towns, only to be hacked to death after leaving. Unless they can guarantee that they will stay in this small town for the rest of their lives, no one wants to offend such a vicious guild whose members are all villains. So when I saw these tall figures charging at others provocatively, many players can only choose to swallow their anger no matter how unwilling they are. Several orcs were walking unscrupulously on the street, and they couldn't help but feel happy when they saw the expressions of the passers-by on both sides who were full of anger but yet swallowed their anger. A bunch of trash. A burly dog-headed orc in the middle opened his mouth full of yellow-stained fangs and cursed wildly. In the real world, they are just a group of weak ordinary humans. Even after the end of the world, he was unable to awaken his powers and could only become a miserable survivor wandering in the human base, relying on relief to survive. But after coming to this virtual world, they can't help but feel the pleasure of having power. Even some awakened people in reality can only crawl at their feet. This is like restarting their second life. If you ignore the damn survival time limit, even letting them live here for a lifetime is not a bad idea. Several tall and sturdy bodies of orcs ran rampant in the market. Passing by several street stalls, if you come across the equipment and props you like. He grinned and took out some junk items that even low-level players looked down upon and exchanged them. Looking at the unwilling expression of the stall owner who dared to be angry but dared not speak out, the pleasure in the hearts of several orcs doubled. They have long known the famous bosses in the town by heart, and they are even more comfortable dealing with these miscellaneous fish. In this way, several strong orc men wandered to a stall next to the alley in the center of the market. The dog-headed orc was holding an apple he had just snatched in his hand. He was eating a big piece of it and passing it by. Suddenly, there was a faint golden light flashing in the corner of my eyes. The dog-headed orc looked suddenly, and his eyes widened. I saw a pile of glittering skill scrolls stacked on the stall in front of me. The dog-headed orc's pupils suddenly widened, and he quickly called to his companions. Several orcs stared at the skill scrolls on the stall with horrified expressions. You know, skill scrolls cannot be obtained by just killing a few monsters. Compared to prop weapons, the explosion rate of skill scrolls is ridiculously low. And the more advanced the boss, the smaller the probability of exploding the skill scroll. They are probably all low-level scrolls exploded by some mobs. The dog-headed orc secretly thought, but the skill scroll is so precious, selling it off will surely bring a lot of benefits. Thinking like this, the dog-headed orc was secretly happy, but he looked up at the stall owner with a ferocious expression. Hello. The entire stall was covered with only a piece of black cloth, on which pale golden skill scrolls were piled up in a haphazard manner. Next to the stall, there is a wicker chair woven with green vines. A man in a black robe sat on a rattan chair with his face obscured by a hat on his head. In his arms was a dark black cat, which looked obedient. Hearing the dog-headed orc's call, the stall owner sitting on the rattan chair raised his head slightly. The hot sun shone on the hat, and half of his face could be vaguely seen. How much do you sell these skill scrolls for? The corners of the stall owner's mouth opened and closed, as if he had just woken up, and he slowly said, Only exchange, not sell. Oh. The dog-headed orc was not surprised but happy to hear this. His mouth cracked, revealing a pair of jagged, yellow-stained ferocious fangs. That's just right, I have some treasures here. The dog-headed orc waved his hand, and several iron swords and armors were scattered in front of the stall. These are all treasures that our Mad Beast Guild has accumulated after many days of clearing the level. Is it okay to exchange them for your skill scrolls? The dog-headed orc smiled evilly, and several orc companions beside him also looked at the stall owner lying on the rattan chair with ferocious faces. His words have already pointed out his origin, and the implication is that you should not be ungrateful. The 9th-ranked guild in the entire server, anyone who sees it will be afraid of it. Looking at the equipment thrown by the dog-headed orcs, the iron swords are rusty, and even the armor has been damaged for a long time. It can be seen that it is garbage that no one picks up on the road. Many players have stopped to watch, and they are angry at the orcs who bully others. He shook his head and sighed at the poor stall owner. It probably took a lot of time to collect these skill scrolls, but under the pressure of the general situation, he could only compromise. However, what no one expected was that the black-robed stall owner said calmly, "No change." It seemed that he was a little more sober, and even his voice became much clearer. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 320. No. The indifferent and somewhat contemptuous attitude immediately angered these orc players who used to be domineering. TNLAI Novel Network. You kid. The dog-headed orc was furious and raised his hand to swing it. Although the town prohibits the use of weapons and skills, as long as it does not cause life-threatening, slight physical contact is allowed. Many onlookers looked at the black-robed stall owner who was about to be humiliated, and couldn't help but sigh and shake their heads, but no one dared to step forward to stop him. However, just when the heavy slap was about to fall. A shout suddenly came from the crowd. "Stop!" Two slender figures walked out of the crowd. Two women walked out of the crowd, one tall and one short. The tall woman had a beautiful face, wearing a waisted long skirt, fair skin, and her hair was tied up behind her head. Her eyebrows were clear and she had an ethereal air. The other girl was wearing thin armor, with a pair of ponytails tied behind her head, curved eyebrows and eyes, and a sweet appearance. When the tall and beautiful woman walked out hand in hand with the ponytail girl, the surrounding players were suddenly in an uproar. "It's the Wind Spirit Sword Princess from Cloud City, how did she come here? It turns out that she is really as beautiful as the rumors. That look, that figure, I just love it." Amid the exclamations of the surrounding players, Fanyan smiled bitterly with a slightly awkward look. She had no intention of meddling in other people's business, but her companions around her saw the injustice, so she had to follow and join in the fun. Several tall orcs also recognized that the person who came was a celebrity on the God Realm list at the first time. In front of the real boss, the orcs didn't dare to be presumptuous, and hurriedly smiled and said, "It turns out to be Lady Jianji. I have heard of your name for a long time, and today I see that you are indeed a fairy-like beauty. Our president is Zhang Tukwang from the Crazy Beast Guild, and he has also admired Lady Jianji for a long time." These orcs are smart, and they immediately brought out their backers. As the president of the Crazy Beast Guild, Zhang Tukwang is also a ruthless man at the top of the God Realm list. The girl with twin ponytails next to Fenyan suddenly put her hands on her waist and said, "Don't bring up your backers here, aren't you ashamed of so many big men bullying one person?" The dog-headed orc smiled awkwardly. "What you said is that we all have clear prices and fair transactions, don't you think so, little brother?" The girl with twin ponytails was about to explode, but was interrupted by Fanyan next to her. "Jing Jing." Fanyan shook her head gently. Jing Jing has a pure and straightforward personality, but she is also quite impulsive in doing things. She turned to look at the black-robed stall owner, and then said to the dog-headed orc, "I happen to be interested in these scrolls, I wonder if you can bear the pain and give them up." As she spoke, Fanyan's jade hand slid, and a beam of light flashed in the air. A set of cool silver-white armor appeared in front of everyone. This is an A-level armor. More than that, I see the quality of this armor. After adding top-quality materials to forge, it is not impossible to achieve S-level equipment. Some players saw the truth in it and exclaimed, "Protective gear is precious, let alone this kind of top-level armor that covers the whole body. It is no exaggeration to save a life at a critical moment. If this armor is exchanged for these low-level skill scrolls, it is still the stall owner who makes a fortune. Since Lady Sword Princess said so, then the treasure will be transferred to you." The dog-headed orc looked flattering, completely different from his previous arrogant appearance. Fanyan smiled and looked at the figure on the rattan chair. Under the cover of the bamboo hat, only the slightly curved white chin could be vaguely seen. It can be seen that the man is not very old. Not enough. 2 words again, but it surprised the players around. Such a huge bargain is not picked up. Is this stall owner a little ungrateful? Suddenly, the rhino orc next to him seemed to see something and said in surprise, That is a job transfer scroll." At this moment, even Fanyan and the girl Jing Jing beside him flashed with horror in their eyes. "What? That is an extremely rare job transfer item." This sentence made the surrounding players completely boil, staring at a golden scroll on the stall with burning eyes. The job transfer scroll, as the name suggests, can change a player's profession and race. In this world, this is a truly precious item that can make people reborn. There is a job transfer scroll. The dog-headed orc's eyes were filled with horror. He had never expected that he would encounter such a treasure this time. "Boy, we can relax our conditions a little bit so that we can negotiate. You hand over the job transfer scroll." With precious items in front of him, he did not hesitate to offend the big guys on the God Realm ranking. As long as he can get the job transfer scroll, his boss will naturally protect him. Seeing that the black-robed figure on the rattan chair did not react, the dog-headed orc looked unhappy and threatened with a gloomy face. "I say, boy, staying in this city will naturally keep you safe for a while. But once you leave the town, no one can guarantee what dangers are hidden outside." Several orc companions around the dog-headed orc also looked at the black-robed stall owner with sharp eyes, and a murderous intent flashed in their eyes. Accompanied by a cat's cry, the black-robed figure under the bamboo hat seemed to wake up at this time. Stroking the black cat's soft hair, he breathed slowly. "It's so noisy early in the morning." I saw the black-robed figure quickly stretching out a slender white finger. His fingers moved in the air, as if they were playing brilliant notes, and several blood streaks spread out like silk threads. Immediately afterwards, blood-red threads streaked through the air, and only a crisp sound of breaking through the air came to Fanyan's ears. The next moment, a few red cracks suddenly appeared on the bodies of the tall orcs. The ferocious expression still remains on the orc's face. The next second, there was a burst of click sound. The bodies of these orcs turned into a pool of blood mist in an instant. These orcs died in front of everyone in an instant, with no bones left. There was horror in the eyes of many players nearby, and some of them hadn't even realized what was happening. Such ability! A look of surprise flashed across Fanyan's eyes, and he looked up in the direction of the black-robed figure. A breeze blew by, revealing the inside story of the Golden Scroll. Job change item book, Ice Flame Snake Python. One player suddenly remembered something and exclaimed. "This is the reward for clearing the 82nd floor not long ago." The surrounding players widened their eyes and spoke with a trembling tone. "Then, the owner of this scroll should be the ruthless man who single-handedly defeated the boss dash. Lone Knight." At the same time, the hat on the man in black robe fell off. The lazy face of a young man was revealed. Fanyan lowered his eyes and stared, and happened to see the man in black robe sitting on the wicker chair and slowly raising his head. Their eyes met, the corners of Miuchiu's mouth raised, and she smiled harmlessly. "Hi, beauty."